This is the Berteig Real Agility Series webinar on agility and teamwork and stuff from home, distributed. Anyway, we are going to be having a very relaxed discussion about the ideas behind what we've done as a team at Berteig and some things that I've seen in other organizations as well. Some of the tools that we use, some of the techniques and let's call them policies that we've established. And I hope that this is valuable for everyone who's here. We have Zoom as our primary tool, and that's also true when we are actually working. And so what I want to do is I want to start with just kind of a very simple outline of the tools. I think that's the easiest part that we'll go through very quickly. I'll show you some of the tools that we're using by sharing my screen. Then we'll talk a little bit about the ways that we've worked internally, a little bit of a case study, if you will, as to how we've been working internally virtually and maintaining our agility in that. And then also we'll spend a little bit of time at the end talking about more general considerations that you might have some Q&A time and stuff like that. So think of this as a fairly open-ended meeting. You're also welcome to just unmute and ask questions at any time. This is not meant to be, just a one-sided conversation. This is not going to be a presentation. I have no slides. So this is my first time doing a webinar with no slides. Hope it goes well. So, by the way, I do have the power to mute people, and the one person who is making lots of noise there I have muted. If that's you, you're welcome to unmute yourself once you're set up and ready to participate without making lots of noise. All right, so first thing first is Zoom itself. And one of the things that I wanted to mention about Zoom is that, of course, it's not the only video conferencing tool, but I will mention specifically that many of my colleagues in the coaching and consulting community have found that Zoom is by far the most reliable video conferencing tool, and it is also one of the best in terms of the features that it has for remote working. So although there are many others, if I was to recommend one, we have tried lots. It merits recommendation. It may not be the best in the whole world, but it is a very, very good tool. The one thing is that administering it can be a little bit complex because there are tons and tons of options. So, for example, one of the options that we have is the idea of breakout rooms. And so right now we have 9 people on the webinar. It's a small group, but that's okay. And I can very easily, as the host of the webinar, I can easily set up breakout rooms, and it only takes a few seconds to do so. In fact, I'm going to do that. And there's all sorts of options, including closing the rooms automatically after a certain amount of time and so forth. So what I'm going to do is take a few seconds to randomly distribute you into breakout rooms of 3 people each, where if you wish, you can take 60 seconds to introduce yourselves to each other once you find yourselves there. And you'll have a little experience of working with the breakout rooms. So here we go. You should get an invitation to join the breakout room, and please take the invitation to try it out. Excellent. We're still missing a few people returning. That's often the case. Takes a few seconds for people to go, oh, I'm supposed to come back now? Huh, I better do that. Hopefully we'll see them shortly. We've got 12 seconds left for the rooms to actually fully close. So all right, looks like everyone's back. Oh, we lost one person along the way. Well, okay. So the idea is very simple. You can make announcements. There's a little bit of a countdown timer that's available. And what we've found both internally and with the experience of others is that the breakout rooms are one of the most powerful features of Zoom for doing online collaboration in a very agile way. So you might have a whole team start in a Zoom call. Everyone does some planning, for example, some sprint planning, and then you set up a few breakout rooms based on, for example, product backlog items or general topics. And everyone goes into the breakout rooms, and you can also have people switching in and out and moving around the breakout rooms as well. Of course, there's some details to the logistics of it, but that's the basic idea. So at Berteig, over the last week, we've been experimenting with Zoom, and I want to share a couple things about that experiment once we get to sort of the more case study part of this. But for now, I'd like to continue to show you a couple other tools. Actually, I'm going to mention a couple before I show you one more. Many organizations are using tools like Slack, so chat-oriented type tools. These tools are excellent if you're relatively new to the tool as an organization or in an agile environment. There are some pitfalls that are worth watching out for. In particular, emotions can rise very, very quickly in a chat environment, and so we found as an organization that it's much better to just do very factual things in the chat and leave decision-making and other such discussions to the quote-unquote face-to-face Zoom environment. Logistics, basic fact sharing, sharing screenshots or other images, that's all good on Slack or Microsoft Teams or those other tools. But to make decisions, it's almost always better to get some people on a Zoom line to make decisions together in a conversational way. So that's one of the big pitfalls of the text-oriented tools for distributed collaboration. Now, the other thing that's worth mentioning is, of course, a virtual task board of some sort or another. And, a lot of organizations, for better or for worse, are already using Jira by Atlassian. That's okay, although I tend to like simpler tools. Jira tends to get in the way too much. And so internally at Berteig, we use Trello, also by Atlassian for what it's worth, but its simplicity actually helps us focus on the collaboration aspects rather than manipulating the tool and administering the tool and talking about the tool and so forth. So strongly recommend very simple card-based tools like Trello. Then the last thing that I want to show you in terms of tools is a much more flexible virtual whiteboarding tool. And so we're using a tool, I'm going to share my screen here, called Miro, M-I-R-O. It's not the only tool in this space for what it's worth, but This is a tool that can be used extremely flexibly for teams, for projects. You can invite other people outside your organization to it with day passes. And you can basically use it to share a collaborative workspace that's much more graphical than a lot of other tools. So I'm going to take you in, and I have to be careful here, but I'm going to take you in and show you two classes that we're running virtually as we speak. So the first is our Certified Scrum Master class. Because it's a very large class with a lot of stuff going on, the environment is very complex and it takes a few minutes to load. But basically what we have here is a whole bunch of people collaborating simultaneously on a space where, as you can see, you can use a lot of graphical elements, you can import pictures. If we zoom in, for example, you can see that there's some, due to the economic collapse and lack of funds, the first pig decided to get materials from a local farmer. So we have some people doing a simulation exercise. If you've been to our CSM, you know about the Three Little Pigs simulation. But that's one example. Another example of a class that's currently going on is a in-house introduction to real agility class. And this is a very different kind of environment, but the same idea is that we have lots of people in the environment. Now in this one, it looks like in both cases there's no activity currently happening. I'm going to do something really bad and just, you know, draw some shapes. Ooh, here's a shape. And of course you can do all the things that you would expect to be able to do in terms of coloring and filling. The point is that it's extremely flexible. Now, the last thing I'll do is I'll just show you, if you create a new board, there are a number of templates that are available. The templates are also very powerful. And so there's some more Agile related templates, although I have to admit, I don't quote unquote approve of all of them. But for example, a number of retrospective templates, you know, if you're involved in a safe environment, product increment planning, user story mapping, etc. And the templates are good. They're quite nicely put together. If you're doing even planning or design works, things like a mind map template can be really good. And again, it's the same thing. It's just this extremely simple technique of just editing stuff in place, and everyone that you're working with can see it as you're doing it. Now, obviously with screen sharing, you might not see all the details perfectly clearly, but the idea is that it's kind of an infinite zoom. You can zoom out really, really, really far, and you can move around. Whoops, I've got the wrong tool for moving around. There we go. You can go as far as you like, and it's really been an incredible collaboration tool for us. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm just going to pause because I just introduced some tools. I'm going to talk about our own internal journey as a case study in a few moments, but I wanted to check if there's any questions from our guests, any comments, if you'd like me to show anything in more detail about the tools so far. Okay, so yes, there is a chat function, as Eric has just discovered. Cost, okay. So most of these tools have free tiers, which is good to get started with. So for example, Zoom, you can set up free accounts, but it's time limited for the length of your meetings. So you pay in order to have meetings that are longer than 40 minutes, I believe. But a lot of the features like breakout rooms are included once you get to the paid tier. Miro, likewise, you can sign up for free, but there is, of course, paid tiers. The one we use, I believe, is $15 US per person per month, but there are, of course, enterprise packages and so forth. Trello, likewise, free tier. The main thing that does is it limits how many people can collaborate on a board at the same time and how many boards you can have. But again, you can pay to have a more unlimited access with Trello. Slack, same thing. There's a free version, but you can pay per person if you want to have longer archiving and a few other features. So all of these are free to try, free to use for basic kind of environments, and would certainly be sufficient for a lot of purposes in the free version. There are, of course, other tools that have other business models and that may suit you better, but I think the key idea is that we have basically 4 tools that we use regularly. The video conferencing with the breakout rooms, the Trello board or equivalent board, the chat, the real-time chat, and the whiteboard for design thinking, modeling, collaborating on more free-form things like a whiteboard. And so those are the kind of things that we use. And for what it's worth, as a company, and so this is getting more into our own case study, we almost never use email internally anymore. One of the things we realized is that the advantage of an internal chat tool like Slack is that we never have to worry about spam or spoofing or phishing emails inside of Slack. We know that the messages come from the people who we trust. And so a lot of our communication has gone into those. There's open source tools. For example, we've experimented with Rocket Chat, rocket.chat, which is open source. And so you can host it yourself. Some organizations need that self-hosting capability. Now, yeah, Matt commented about the question about Zoom. Any other questions that I can address? The chat is a good way to ask questions if you're interested. And I'll keep that open so that you can ask questions at any time and I'll try and address them. So I did want to spend a few minutes talking briefly about how we've been collaborating as a team lately. I'm going to share a document in a moment that kind of describes the details, and I'll be happy to provide this as guidelines. We'll post it on our website somewhere and let everyone know. But basically what happened is up until a week and a half ago, of course, like many organizations, we were doing a lot of things in person. Our business was in-person business, of course, with training and so forth. But a lot of our team meetings were in person. A lot of our, you could call them sub-team meetings were in person. Even though we're a distributed team, we really preferred that in-person approach to working. And so we tried to do it as much as possible. We were working effectively in 3-week-long sprints, and we would have an all-hands meeting in order to review how a sprint had gone and then move on to planning for a next sprint. Now, of course, with the social distancing and self-isolation requirements that have recently come in place, we had to leverage our tool set and decide how to work in a new way that would be more effective. And we also were faced with a business crisis, obviously, because of the lack of in-person training as a revenue source. So we decided to basically, over the course of a week, completely transform how we work as a business and the business itself. And so starting last Monday, we made it so that every single day from 9 until 1 and from 1 until 4, each of those 3-hour periods was a full sprint. And we would get everyone together on Zoom on a common conference line, and we still are, by the way, and basically spend about 20 minutes doing sprint planning. So, for example, we set up a very simple Trello board, and I'm going to share that just for a few seconds to show you. So this is our actual internal Trello board. Please don't take any screenshots at this moment. But very, very simple options for what to do overall, long-term stuff, what to do next, in progress, and done. And very, very simple concept, nothing complicated needed here, especially because when you're doing 3-hour-long sprints, you don't want to have something complicated. You want to be able to see things very quickly. You want to be able to see what is immediately in progress and what needs to be done immediately, as well as the done stuff. So in those 3-hour sprints, we took 20 minutes to do sprint planning. We would also have the product owner guiding that discussion. That happened to be me. We would also have a Scrum Master who would help to facilitate that, and I'll come back to that in a moment. And then likewise, at the end of every 3-hour sprint, we would have a 20-minute sprint review and then sprint retrospective. And so the structure inside was very interesting because we used the breakout room functionality of Zoom. And so we would make a plan for the sprint, choose a few product backlog items to get started on or to continue on. 3 hours, it's hard to complete a product backlog item. And then self-organize into breakout rooms. So the basic idea was, say, here's the topics. So create a virtual class, do some communication work or logistics work, and whatever the sort of topics are in relation to the sprint, create a breakout room for each topic, and then have people basically put up their hand. Hey, who wants to be in the create the virtual class breakout room? Who wants to be in the logistics breakout room? And then as host, you assign people to those rooms. And of course, they can move around over time. The Scrum Master, the facilitator for the sprints, deliberately moves between the breakout rooms, checks in on people, sees if anyone needs anything, looks to see if there's any obstacles that need to be removed, offers to help, and then makes sure to reconvene people, give people time checks like, hey, you should take a break at some point. And then doing that twice a day was what I can only describe as an amazing experience. I want to just say personally, I've worked in a lot of different organizations doing different lengths of sprints. Prior to that experience, the shortest, quote unquote, real sprints that I had worked with as a coach or consultant were 2-day-long sprints. These 180-minute sprints, these 3-hour sprints, were actually, honestly, just fantastic in terms of keeping everyone focused, keeping energy levels high, making sure that we were checking in regularly, and really just getting huge amounts of work done at a very high quality along the way. I'm not saying that everyone should go to 3-hour sprints. However, when you're doing virtual work like this, the opportunity for collaborating can somehow disappear if you don't have a very tight structure to the work. So what I'm specifically recommending is that if you're now working in virtual teams, or if you have been in the past even, that you seriously consider switching to a much shorter sprint length. You might try 1 day long sprints if you think 3 hours might be too intense. But the idea is that you're constantly trying to deliver real results, and that helps with keeping everyone really focused on the work, rather than what can happen normally is if you have a lot of flexibility, people stop communicating. They stop collaborating, and the structure, the intense structure, actually really creates that opportunity for intense collaboration that normally you would only find in an in-person environment. One other thing I'll mention about it, though, is sustainability. It is very energy intensive. And so the time box that we decided on, 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon, was deliberately designed to make sure that people would have a little bit of time outside of the sprints for downtime, for personal administrative work in the business, whatever it happens to be. And not only that, we only did it for 4 days out of the week rather than 5 days a week. And I think that's an appropriate level to continue, so that everyone has at least 1 day a week of a break time when they're not in these sort of really focused, intense sprints. So I'd like to show you just some guidelines that I'm drafting. These aren't finalized, but these are based on our own internal experience. They will become part of an experience report that I'm going to be writing up about how we've done this this work. So it's still in a Word document rather than a nice PowerPoint format. But the basic idea that I've already summarized is just this 9 a.m. to noon and from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. for the actual sprints themselves. And that 1 day a week would be a non-sprint day. However, if there is a long weekend, I would expect that we would still maintain the 4 days of sprinting. The breakout rooms are really critical. Often create at least 2 breakout rooms for people to focus on specific types of work. I think it would depend a little bit on the size of your team. Our team is a little bit larger. We had, I believe, normally 10 or 11 people working simultaneously. And if you're in a smaller team, like 5 or 6 people, you may not need the breakout room functionality. You may be able to just stay in one room with people muting if they need to do something separate from the rest of the team. That said, even with only 5 or 6, 2 breakout rooms can often help people to really focus, to do pair working or small group working. Attending the sprints 100% of the time is not required, but there are some guidelines about when people should attend the sprints that I'm working on. So if we're working on something creative or innovative or problem solving, also, if we don't know what to do and we want to help others, that's another reason to attend the sprints. And funny thing is actually also if you have simple repetitive tasks that can be easily parallelized, then that can be another good reason to participate in the sprints. From our own business, some things that we found that were good to do in the sprints, a lot of the writing and creative work that we do, so proposals, articles, training curriculum, also decision-making work, business opportunities and strategies, and prepping for client work. In software development environments, being a software developer myself, I know that this kind of work would then be translated into things like the problem solving, the design work, whether that's user interface design or system design. And although sometimes coding could be done individually, we all know from extreme programming that pair programming is a very, very good practice. And so I would encourage even programming work, testing work to also be done collaboratively. There are a few things that we're thinking maybe not so good in terms of the actual sprints. So if we're interacting with clients, whether it's training, coaching, or phone calls, It's also important, though, to give people some downtime. When you're working this intensely, being able to step off the video conference line for 15 or 20 minutes to get a coffee, have a little walk, sitting in a chair continuously for 3 hours is actually difficult. And so strongly recommend that people have the freedom to take some downtime. If you have part-time people working like we do, then obviously if they've done their sort of put in their hours, then that would not require them to be in the sprints. And there are some tasks that are truly individual. So if you're doing something that really no one else can help with, you might want to check with the team just in case, but there are some pieces of work that are legitimately individual. And likewise, if you need to miss participating in a sprint for an extended period for any reason, then your coming and going might be more disruptive than anything, and it might be better to just skip a sprint. The power of this in terms of collaboration has been really incredible. And I wanted to give, maybe one or two of my team members who are also on the call, if you wanted to say anything about your experience with doing these 3-hour sprints. I've covered a lot of ground, but I've also been talking for a long time.
I'll go forward, I guess. I found it probably the most collaborative interaction that we've had, and I've been here for 3 years. And the amount of work, the enormous amount of work of converting all of the face-to-face classroom materials, to do that in 4 days, it took 12 of us, which maybe that was an advantage over other organizations, but we were able to process that and conduct the CSM, which is on day 2, which you saw, as well as the private event that you saw, and the third event, which is the CSPO, which is Thursday and Friday this week. We were able to do all that, and that's not just rah, 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 we're so good, but as Mishkin was saying, it is the tools, it's leveraging the tools and the talents of people around. I think in true Agile form, stepping up with our A game and putting in the time and doing Agile right, I would say. It was powerful, very, very powerful.
Yeah, and I just wanted to acknowledge that Sue asked a question. Did you find that short 3-hour sprints twice daily added a lot of overhead to the team members? And I don't know, Mark, do you want to say anything about that? Since you were one of the team members.
For 3 hours without break for quite a bit. So I found that exhausting, but when we were done, we were done. And if it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon and we finished our sprint review, we're done. And then, the next day we're refreshed and starting again. And, we're always moving stuff across the Trello board. And it feels good to accomplish it. It really does. So I'm not sure if I answered the whole question or if somebody else from the team wants to jump in.
Yeah, I found that it was incredible how quickly work flowed. I didn't at any point feel overburdened. There was a lot to do, especially last week, kind of transitioning the entire business to a new virtual way of working, both internally and in the products we deliver. But things moved very quickly, very collaboratively. And I think, as Mishkin mentioned, ironically, in this kind of self-isolation climate that we're in, I found that our team became much more unified, and we kind of became closer and worked much more collaboratively than we have in recent memory. So it has been pretty incredible.
Yeah, and I'll mention also one thing I forgot to mention is that during the sprints, we didn't do daily scrums. So we didn't have say hourly check-in meetings. Rather, our facilitator, our Scrum Master, would just make sure to be rotating through the breakout rooms fairly regularly, checking in to make sure that things were going okay. And, sometimes would identify areas where someone might want to change their breakout room because of something going on in another one. But the overhead was very low. And both myself as product owner and whoever was facilitating, we would also contribute to the work. it wasn't just standing back and, you know, observing and so forth. So really there was very, very little overhead. The one thing I'll say about it though is that when you're doing 3-hour sprints, suddenly 5 or 10 minutes seems to matter in a way that it doesn't when you're doing 1 week long sprints. And so again, I'll just emphasize the idea, the importance of being conscious to take a break. A 3-hour period is too long to go without a break. But also the importance of people being on time and the time boxing. So, you know, if someone doesn't show up at 9 o'clock, you can't wait for everyone to show up. You just have to go ahead with sprint planning at 9 o'clock and 0 seconds, because you've only got 20 minutes, and taking more than that suddenly makes it so that, yeah, the overhead would be excessive. So if you think about it in terms of actual measurement, you know, we did 20 minutes at the start of 3 hours, 20 minutes at the end of 3 hours. So 40 minutes out of 180 minutes was this planning, checking in, and so forth. But it doesn't feel like it's overhead, because when you're working that intensely, you need those check-in points anyway. I don't know, does that answer your question, Sue? I think you can do a thumbs up, or I don't know how it works. Anyway, any other questions about, yeah, thanks. Okay, good. Any other questions about our little case study and how we did that work? Okay, in Zoom, can participants see the other breakout rooms or move between the rooms themselves? So there is a little technique for that. So under normal circumstances, the host of the Zoom meeting is the only one who can do the breakout room thing. However, it is possible to allow other people to be co-hosts. And when you are a co-host, what happens is that you can, in fact, move yourself between the breakout rooms. Only the host can actually set them up. So for example, Matt, I just made you a co-host, and if we were to go into breakout rooms, you would discover that you could move yourself around. In fact, I'm not 100% sure, but you may now be able to see the breakout room menu item on your Zoom window at the bottom, where you would normally see things like your audio controls and so forth. That said, being a co-host does not give you full control. So it's kind of a part-way answer. Unfortunately, when you're in a breakout room, you cannot see what's happening elsewhere, and there's no way to see what's happening in other rooms without actually leaving the one you're currently in and going to another one. However, there's one more tip that we've just started exploring, literally today. So I can't say for sure whether it's going to work well, but that is to have a second device. And so I'm holding up my iPad, and to have a second device and use that as essentially a second account to join Zoom, then you could have your device number one join one breakout room, and device number two join a different breakout room, so that you could monitor things. And we have a colleague who is not on right now. He's been using 2 different devices in a similar fashion during our CSM. For example, he's been in the room with the CSM going on, and also joined us earlier today for some other stuff, but simultaneously by using a second device. So not every company is going to be issuing 2 devices to people, so your mileage might vary with that one, but the second device is indeed another possibility. Yeah, any other questions about our experience report or the tools that we've talked about so far? Of course, ask anytime. There is one final topic that I wanted to cover, which is basically just some general principles and what we have seen other organizations do. So I've been coaching for a long time. Obviously, technology has been there for a long time to do video conferencing and various levels of remote work. One of the things that we've sort of discovered is really this idea of visibility. So we're on a webinar, so I understand if people don't want to have their video turned on, but at least in terms of real team collaboration, really everyone needs their audio on and their video on. It's not a collaborative environment if you can't see or hear people. And so if you are in a team collaborating and you need to leave, then you turn your video off, turn your mic off, and that means you're not present anymore. So you need an indicator to say, hey, I'm not present. And that's the best way to do it. I've seen that in a lot of organizations when people dial in with a phone rather than using full video, for example. It really diminishes the collaborative power of working in this kind of virtual environment. You can see people's faces, you can see expressions, you can see people putting their hands up, you can see people, if you look closely, you can see them frowning, although it's a little harder depending on your screen resolution. But those are indicators that are important as a way to at least have some semblance of the in-person environment. And so that's the principle that's at play. You know, if you're trying to be agile virtually, then one of the key things is try to mimic the in-person environment as closely as possible. So that you know when someone is in the room, they can hear you and you can hear them. They can see you, you can see them. That's being in the room together. Likewise, you know, the reason we have a tool like Miro is because whiteboards are such an important part of agile team environments, or a simple tool like Trello. The real-time chat is kind of a way to whisper at each other, right? So you might be in a 10-person meeting, but you really want to just talk to one person briefly to ask a question or something like that. Those sideband conversations and that ability to do that is important, and something like Slack really helps that idea of just turning for a moment to someone and, hey, what about blah, 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 and, you know, getting that quick side conversation. Those side conversations are natural, they're important. Not everyone has to be 100% focused every single second for what's going on with the whole team, and you need a way to mimic that. So Slack helps with that, or other chat tools help with that. Other principles are visibility. It's very hard for me to show you precisely without actually, you know, turning my whole computer around and making a mess of my office. But I am going to show you that the way that I'm working is with a big monitor as well. So I've got a nice 4K monitor that's connected to my computer, my laptop. And so screen real estate is really important. And that's another thing that's about mimicking the real world environment. In the real world environment, the fidelity of our tools, the quote unquote screen resolution is practically infinite. If we're just working on a single laptop screen or device, that's actually very limiting, and it makes it very difficult to feel like you have space to work. It's like everything gets narrowed down into this, you know, 14 or 15-inch screen. And so I strongly encourage organizations that are having people do remote work to really, you know, get that extra monitor in place. 4K monitors are not expensive anymore. The one that I'm using, I think, was about $500, and it's a 43-inch monitor. And, you know, it makes a huge difference for my ability to work. And I know other people have second monitors. Not everyone does. Not everyone necessarily needs it or wants it or has the space in their home for it. But you know, that should be something that is in your mind as well, that if you're just working on a single laptop screen, it's kind of like a limitation of the workspace, and it can feel cramped, claustrophobic for people, and that second monitor can often help with that. I will say just in general that I'm an introvert, so I don't mind working from home, but I will say actually that working in this sort of collaborative Zoom video environment is actually just as exhausting for me as an introvert as working in an actual team room. So, you know, people are going to be tempted to sign off, put on their headphones, listen to their music. And if you're facilitating such an environment, you need to establish good team norms about how people step away from the environment if they have that sense of exhaustion. People do need to be able to take breaks, no doubt about it, but there's different protocols for doing that in an online environment versus an in-person environment. In person, you leave the room, you go to the bathroom, you go to the coffee shop, you take a walk around the block. Virtually, it's tempting to stay on in order to seem like you're there, but then to, you know, mute or whatever. And I would encourage you to try and make the protocols around that clear for everyone, so that people know when they're present, when they're able to work, or when they're checked out for whatever reason they need to check out.